This evening, we'll discuss the year 2000 computer problem. How will the millennium bug affect government, business, and individuals? Is the problem being adequately addressed? Our guests tonight are Kentucky Auditor Ed Catchett, Aldona Valicenti, Chief Information Officer for the state of Kentucky, Tracy Jefferson, a computer systems engineer and president of Terran Technologies, and Bob Brown, president of the Bluegrass Year 2000 Group and the Central Kentucky Computer Society. Our host is Bill Goodman.
Good evening. In a little over 400 days, America and the rest of the world will come to terms with a problem of our own making, all because of our computers. They may not know what day it is. It is the year 2000 computer problem. The millennium bug could affect a number of government agencies, businesses, and consumer services, as we hear in this report from Kentucky Tonight's Renee Shaw.
Hi. How are you today?
Banking is just one example of the kinds of services likely affected by the year 2000 computer problem, Y2K for short. University of Louisville professor S. Srinivasan says many time-triggered systems, like those found in banks, are being updated.
When computers were coming up very fast in the 60s, they were trying to find out how they could save some money in processing data, large amounts. One of the ways they thought they could save money was by reducing some storage capacity. They found out that if they can cut out the 2 digits of the year 1960, they store less.
Srinivasan says that many computers don't recognize the last 2 zeros in the year 2000, a problem he demonstrates using a bank loan as an example. Srinivasan wanted to figure the monthly payment and interest for a $15,000 loan for 3 years at 10% interest starting in 1998. The result? It shows a monthly payment at $124.96 for 1,164 months, or 97 years, for a total payment of more than $145,000.
The problem happened here because when it went from year 98 to 2001, it did not recognize that as 2001. It saw that as year 01. And in the calculation, it took that 98 minus 01 as 97, and it thought you are doing it for 97 years, not 3 years.
The problem to fix is not that difficult if you understand what it is you're trying to do and where these bugs are.
Nathaniel Green is the director of the Institute for Leading and Managing Quality at the University of Louisville. The program offers planning strategies for companies trying to avert a bite from the millennium bug.
But who's going to fix it? How much is it going to cost me? These are the kinds of things that I think a lot of people, and as well as municipalities, may be ducking, thinking that it'll just go away.
Virginia Denny, an instructor with the Institute, says many large companies are Y2K ready.
What's happening, though, is their suppliers are not. It only takes one little supplier who hasn't prepared for everything to stop. We are, for the first time that I can think of, facing a worldwide, completely social, intertwined problem. Everything's connected, from the satellites that circle our planet to electricity that flows in all directions and communication lines. We will all feel it in one way or another.
If I have a computer that is Y2K ready, but I have a telephone line that serves me that's hooked up to another computer that's not Y2K ready, I am still subject to the failure. It's not a matter that I can say my computer is Y2K ready, therefore I'm really not concerned about anybody else. I got to be concerned about the others.
Green says the real test for determining whether or not systems are ready for the next millennium will only happen when the clock strikes midnight, January 1st, 2000. I'm Renee Shaw for Kentucky Tonight.
Good evening to our panel. Thanks very much to all of you for being here, and good evening to all of you joining us from across the state of Kentucky tonight, the year 2000 computer problem. Let's just say if it was January 1 in the year 2000, Mr. Jefferson, what sort of Y2K problems could we anticipate?
Well, you're going to run into several problems. One is instability in the power grid. The power companies are not ready, and they're probably not going to be, especially in complex systems like the nuclear plants. It's pretty much considered a given that some of those plants will go offline. And a lot of people think that your power system is local and there's no problem, but that's not true. The grid is national, and instability in one area can create problems in others. And there are safety switches that may start shutting down the power grid. So power is very dangerous. Anything like security systems, if they're not compliant, you may find yourself not able to get in your office building. Your elevator pass may not work. You could even go to your local hotel and not be able to use your room key to get in the door because it thinks you checked out. Those are several areas that you can really see problems.
And we'll talk about those and more tonight. Mr. Brown, we hear all sorts of stories, some from the Y2K survivalist, hoarding food and money and keeping back paper goods, to those who might think that this is just a nuisance problem and are asking the question, if it's such a big problem, why haven't we heard about it and discovered the solutions before? What's the reality in all of that, and what do we do about it?
Well, the reality probably lies right in the middle. There will be some problems, and there may even be some serious problems in some cases. Mostly it will be an awfully lot of minor problems, which could add up to a serious problem. I disagree with the people that say it's completely a hoax and there will be no problem at all, and I just about as equally disagree with the people that think they need to take a truckload of canned goods out behind a mountain somewhere. That's not necessary. There will be some disruptions to normal life, but we deal with disruptions all the time. Most anyone has had a power outage at their home. Lightning storms do that. It's hard to go through a complete year without a power outage of a few hours, and it may well happen again.
Mr. Jefferson mentioned a few of the things that we can look for. Your ideas along those lines are sort of the worst case and best case scenarios of people who are prepared to handle this year 2000 computer problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, in business, I think the people should survey their systems, see what equipment they have that's dedicated to their business or their home that is date-sensitive equipment. In other words, equipment where you put in the date, or machines that know what day it is and schedule events based on those days or on those calculations. But you're seeing the large banks and insurance companies are already running into that kind of calculation. Mortgages extend well beyond the year 2000, insurance policies and so on. They've already encountered the problem, already had to fix a lot of their computer software, and are still at it, working at it very diligently. Some of the smaller systems that don't do such long-range date calculations, maybe a recipe in a factory or something like that only calculates things for a week or two in advance, they may not realize they have a problem until it nears the end of 1999, and then they may find calculations not correct anymore.
Mr. Hatchett, in June of this year, you issued a report and said that the state's systems are not adequately prepared for the year 2000 problem. Has that changed, and what's the status today?
Well, of course, year 2000 compliance is a moving target as we get closer and closer to the magic hour. But let me begin by taking a little bit of issue with the premise of your original question to Mr. Jefferson, and that was what happens on January 1, 2000. From an auditor's point of view, if you choose a different fiscal year than the calendar year, your problems begin a lot earlier than that. And so, for example, in Kentucky, we have local units of government, county governments and city governments that are on the fiscal year that begins July 1 of 99, and the moment that their budgeting kicks in for the fiscal year that's going to bleed over into the year 2000, we're going to begin to have problems. What that says to us is that you can't wait until the latter part of 1999 to have those compliance systems up and running. You need a buffer of time. And so one of the findings that we had in our audit of Kentucky state government and its management of the Y2K issue was that we felt that they were not giving themselves enough of a buffer for having some of their mission-critical systems up and running. We felt that at that particular juncture, our field work was conducted from September of 97 through April of 98. the various cabinets of government had not issued prioritized listings of Y2K non-compliant systems. We felt that the coordinated management of the Y2K issue had not gotten the unequivocal statement that it was needed, that this is a priority for the Commonwealth. And because my responsibility is to see to it that taxpayers are protected and that public resources are adequately and effectively employed, my job was to see to it that we don't have a disruption of services to the citizens of Kentucky, and that we try to bring to the attention of the public at large that this is an issue. If I can raise the profile of the Y2K issue with the citizens at large, then it seems to me we go a long way toward tackling the mutual problems that we all have.
Ms. Vellicente, excuse me very much for that. Your primary job in this area, please, and how have you gone about tackling the responsibility of really making the state system better prepared for what we eventually face, whether it's in July of this next year or whether it's in the year 2000?
Well, first of all, I think we very much appreciated the auditor's report, because it did raise the profile, and I think it raised the urgency. I think the state, up until that time, at least until I arrived on the scene, really had no strong focal point. And, you know, that's probably one of my main jobs for the next year and a half, is to really see that we remediate the systems. I think it did give us a sense of urgency that we might not have had before. But secondly, I think it made us rally and prioritize what is mission critical. Obviously, the state doesn't have enough resources, nor enough time, nor enough money, both people and money, to do everything. So what is it that we need to do that is mission critical that we need to remediate? We might have a much, much better handle on that right now, and I would invite the auditor to come back again, because I really think that we need to be vigilant about this. About 66% of the mission critical systems have been remediated. I would like to introduce a couple of other topics, though, around the whole issue of mission-critical systems or remediation. You know, we all do a very good job, or think we do a very good job at what we do. Programmers think that they're fixing the right things, that they're doing it with a degree of quality. But one of the things that I think is important is that we have some independent verification of that we bring in a third party to take a look at, have we done a good job? And secondly, once we have remediated and put the systems back in production, have someone else come in and check them out. Again, you know, sometimes, in hindsight, we have missed something. And the intent for the state is to do that with some of its mission-critical systems.
What are some of the problems that you see that the state needs to continue to work on that affects a lot of citizens of the state, a lot of the taxpayers, and how might that play out as we get closer to this time?
Well, you know, we have given a lot of attention to, quote, systems, in essence. What are the computer systems? Are they going to run? But I think that we're discovering many other components. First of all, the hardware. Are our computers up to date? Some of them are not. Is our networking equipment up to date? Some of it maybe, maybe not. That is also a discovery problem. We have third-party suppliers who actually run systems for the state that we actually have to interact with, probably get some of that third-party verification. And the fourth category, sort of, that I think that we're beginning to deal with, by the way, not just the state, but I think all over the whole country, is really the issue of embedded chips. You know, we have a lot of old facilities, we have elevators, we have security systems, we have parks, we have all kinds of equipment. Just inventorying that equipment and then going through a remediation process is one of the issues that I think is becoming of a much, much heightened awareness now.
Mr. Hatchett, does the state have enough time, in your estimation, to address these problems?
I don't think so, but I do applaud Ms. Vellicente in the focus that she has brought to the effort. Again, speaking as an auditor, the auditors nationwide are looking at the question of the impact that the Y2K potential liabilities have on the auditees for purposes of our certifying the annual financial statements of the public enterprises. So one of my responsibilities is to certify the Commonwealth of Kentucky's annual financial report. And I'm confronting the issue about how much potential liability does the government face because of the possibility that it may not become Y2K compliant in time, and what impact does that have on a fair statement of the Commonwealth's financial statement, and a statement that is free of material misstatements. I asked our Attorney General for an opinion about the potential liability of the Commonwealth in that sort of scenario. And it turns out that an opinion about that would be contrary to the interests of his client to hypothesize about that kind of liability. So again, it's a problem for those of us who are going to be auditing enterprises and who are going to be trying to give an opinion on whether the financial statement is what it should be. And for example, I've received email messages in the last few days from my colleagues who are auditing in states like Oregon and Massachusetts and places like that. And they are confronting this issue, and in a couple of states they have already made the clear decision that they're going to issue a qualified opinion on the state's financial statement. That is not a decision I've made in Kentucky yet, but it's something that we've got to analyze.
Let's talk again about the citizens of the state and the nation, but let's talk about Kentucky taxpayers and the people who are living in some of these smaller towns and rural areas. Mr. Jefferson, you mentioned some of those things that they might expect, and the question again, do you think that that citizens are aware of the problems? And again, let's talk about some of those problems, maybe not with airlines or with the national headlines that they've been reading about, but in their own towns and counties around the state of Kentucky.
Well, certainly the thing that anybody's going to be concerned about is their job. If you have a company, even if they are compliant, they could find themselves having trouble because of Y2K. For instance, if I'm an engineering firm and I do a lot of highway construction, and if I depend on the state to give me those jobs, for example, and if the state has problems in their tax and revenue collection because their systems aren't compliant, the state's not bringing in revenue, they're not going to build highways. And next thing you know, you're cutting employees out of a firm. And then there's a chain reaction to their contractors, the construction companies. And, that's just one example. And that can happen in any industry. You can have a company that is fully compliant, but if your customers aren't compliant, if you depend on anybody to bring money into your business to survive, if they're not compliant and they're not spending money with you, and it's going to affect you, or if they are spending money but you cannot deliver goods because your vendors are not compliant and you cannot get the materials or personnel you need, the resources you need to get something done, it affects the company you work for. You could find yourself completely out of work and going, what happened here? I don't know.
Let's talk about some of these other areas that might affect citizens, consumer services. All of you are experts and certainly have done a lot of reading in this, so I would ask all of you the same question. Let's just take banking, for example. I've read that banking of all major industries might be in better shape than most, but at the same time, we also hear about people talking about taking money out before the year 2000, Mr. Brown, and keeping some out of the banks and investment houses. Not we're going to have a run, not that we're going to have a run on these banks and investment houses, but still, how serious is that problem?
Well, it's hard to tell. And it doesn't take very much to be pretty serious. If a large majority of the population all listens to some of these people that recommend withdrawing huge amounts of money, that amounts to a run on the bank, and that could lead to a lot of difficulty. One point to make, though, is that the year 2000 will be a long holiday weekend, and a lot of people will be taking extra money out of the bank anyway. And so where's the boundary between normal withdrawal of money and abnormal withdrawal of money?
Should the government have some oversight in this area? Should they be stepping in with maybe a little bit more authority than they are at this point and raising questions?
Are you speaking about the state government or federal government? I think what you're seeing is actually federal government stepping in and trying to do a lot more in terms of coordination, in terms of publicity. I think the money situation that we just discussed is an interesting one, because that was one that, by the way, we have not brought yet Mr. John Koskinen's name into the picture, but he's the one that told the story. He stood in front of a number of...
Tell us who he is for the federal government.
is the chairman of the President's Council on the year 2000, and so, you know, partly I think what he's trying to do a sell job that the federal government will be ready, but I think that he's also acting very much as a coordinating point. He said, look, if everybody believes that the bank is going to fail, then we can actually create that panic ourselves by going in and drawing out money, whether there's an issue or not. I do believe that some of the smaller banks that might not have done their due diligence, have done their project work, are going to have an issue, are going to have a problem. But I think it's up to us to make sure that we alert them that there are, you know, it's not too late to look at your mission-critical things.
So you would be in favor of some sort of increased government oversight, Mr. Hatchett?
I was simply going to observe that the banking industry is one of the most highly regulated industries, and it is regulated on a dual basis by both the federal government and the state governments in many instances. And so you have the advantage of having the FDIC and the Federal Reserve having been very focused on that for some time. You have Edward Yardeni, who is the economist for Deutsche Bank's American subsidiary, who is
recognized as one of the experts in this area.
Yes, who's
but
suggesting...
also very pessimistic.
Very pessimistic, suggesting there's about a 60 or 70% chance of a global recession on the order of the kind that we suffered in the early 70s when there was a disruption of oil. But I guess I make all that point to say that the financial industry, I think, has been extremely focused on the matter. And I'm concerned, in response to your question, about the regulated industries that we in state government regulate, like hospitals and utilities and insurance and some of those. I think there's a grave concern about that.
I think you're seeing sort of a blitz campaign from the Small Business Administration right now, because so many people are small business people, entrepreneurs, especially, you know, insurance people, people who are dependent on a lot of the date calculations, who might not have been aware of that whole year 2000 issue.
Well, hold your thoughts on that, and we'll get back to some of those other industries that you mentioned a few minutes ago, but we'll invite our viewers to join us tonight. We are talking about the year 2000 computer problem, and we want to hear from you. We invite you to call us toll-free at 1-800-494-7605. That's 1-800-494-7605. Calls are taken in the order received. If you get a busy signal, it may be because Kentucky Tonight lines are filled or because circuits in your calling area are busy. We hope you'll try again. Mr. Hatchett, you mentioned some of those other areas, banking, but you also mentioned insurance and a couple of utilities. Certainly. Let's talk about utilities. We've heard about some disruption there from one of the panelists, Mr. Brown, Mr. Jefferson. Your comments?
Yeah, the problem with utilities is no utility stands alone. If you look at, we'll say, Louisville Gas and Electric, LG&E does not have its own private pipeline to Alaska. It depends on delivery through other systems, just as LG&E has relationships with other electric vendors. So even if LG&E were compliant, and they, I don't think, have stated that they are or when they will be yet, they could actually be effectively sabotaged down the chain somewhere if other companies are not compliant. So the complexity of this is amazing for a two-digit problem. The complexity, especially economically, is unreal. And you have areas like Asia that have not even begun to address this problem. So if I'm a company that builds something and I depend on raw materials and I depend on deliveries, of, especially using just-in-time inventory, I'm depending on chips and components to make it to my plant in time. If there's a Y2K problem anywhere in that distribution point, the whole thing can come to a stop. The automotive industry is one that has been very diligent with this, but they are very vulnerable. On the other side of it, large retailers. I think we were having a discussion earlier about Walmart, that if they depend on just-in-time inventory for delivery, and if they suddenly can't get supplies from one person, well, they're going to go somewhere else. So you end up having a company lose employees and its jobs and someone else getting it. It's just the economic impact is what's unbelievable. And if you have the banking system has any problems or utilities start having problems, it can really build up into something. It could gain momentum, and what should have been a minor problem could become a big one.
Let's talk a little bit about, I want you to comment on that, but I want to also ask about health services, about the possibility of, we've read about pacemakers and other medical equipment. Yes, your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, when we talk about the embedded chip, and I'm not sure that I remember the exact billions of embedded chips that we have anymore, because so many different numbers have been quoted. First of all, I think we need to recognize that not all of them have a problem. Probably less than 10% do. The big issue is we don't know which ones. So they're in pacemakers, they're in drug emitting devices, drug delivery systems, they're in hospitals, they're in respirators, they're all over. In other words, if we have tied the patient's care to a date sensitivity, it probably has an issue. And it's not an easy fix, because you have to go and find the maker, you have to go and trace it down, and who produced it, et cetera, et cetera. So you can imagine, it's a huge problem.
Mr. Brown, what can people who are listening to the program tonight do about these kinds of problems that we're talking about and isolating tonight in the year 2000?
Well, they need
or in 1999.
Well, they need to start way in advance. In fact, it may already be too late in some cases. But they need to set up a project where they search their inventory of tools and equipment and whatever in looking for date-sensitive problems. And there's a process basically similar to triage, where you can isolate ones that you know are not a problem. You can isolate ones that are a serious problem and go right to work repairing those. And then you have a few left that are kind of hard to tell. Numbers that are beginning to surface publicly show that of all the embedded systems, something like 75%, and that's a very rough number and it'll vary in different industries, are free, no problem. Get them out of the way and put a green dot on them or something like that. Of those left, about 90% of the ones left are going to be a varying degree of a minor problem, easy to fix, maybe require the machine operator or a worker to alter their normal workflow, but can learn to live with it. About 5 or 10% are seriously going to fail and need replacement or repair. And in embedded systems, especially the older ones, where the tools are no longer in existence or the people are no longer around that know how to fix them, they just need to be replaced.
All right. Okay, let's take our first phone call of the night on Kentucky Tonight from Bud Hill from Louisville. Mr. Hill, a question or comment, please.
Yes, sir. I was wondering if the power grid's going to be going down in the middle of January. Is the city set up for trying to get everybody heated up if we're going to be losing power for such a long time?
Good question, Mr. Hill. Thanks very much for calling Kentucky Tonight. Answer from anyone. Mr. Jefferson, are you prepared to answer a question like that?
The biggest problem is if there may be absolutely no problem, and it could go out, it could blink, you could have surges. It's an all and unknown. So the city, I think, would certainly not be prepared to deal with that, because if we had a power outage that affected a large region, that would be effectively catastrophic. I mean, that's a huge failure, especially in January. I don't really personally, and I'm considered kind of a conservative person, I don't really see Jefferson County, Kentucky going out of power for any period of time. Our opinion is the instability will cause brownouts, which could damage equipment, and cause surges, which can also damage equipment, or take networks down. Things that are going to be annoying, could burn up your appliances. It could be costly, but I don't think that we are going to see a huge failure that stays, at least not in this area, because we are only so dependent on the one area in energy that's very dangerous at this is the nuclear system.
Mr. Hatchett?
The city of Lubbock, Texas recently got some publicity in the Wall Street Journal about having simulated a January 1, 2000 catastrophe. And so they got into a war room and they had people think up all kinds of scenarios that would create problems. And one of the scenarios was that they simply did not have enough power to make sure that everybody was warm. So what they did was to stagger the sections of the city that had sewage services and electrical power and all of that in order to be able to have enough to run them, and they would get back to them as time went on. But everyone at one time did not have those services. So I thought that was kind of an interesting scenario.
Well, I think the one thing that we haven't talked about, and as we haven't talked about contingency planning.
Right.
You know, and that's really a component of getting ready for the year 2000. I mean, we can do all the assessing, all the remediating, but I think part of the plan is always to do contingency planning.
What happens if?
Yeah, and this is one of those areas where we're really working with a lot of other people.
Are we doing that in the state of Kentucky?
Yes, we are.
How is that being facilitated? Are you working with each community or communities that contact you?
We have the Department of Emergency Services, which is actually administered by the National Guard. And in conjunction with them, we have already had conversations saying, you know, what if we have some small failures, but they're spread all over the state? What would we do? They, in turn, are now coordinating with the federal government, with FEMA, to say, all right, what do we do from a contingency? So that, first of all, it's really alerting people. How do we plan not to have a contingency? But part of that conversation and part of that discussion is going on right now.
All right. Back to the phones. Jeffrey Stone from Coldwater in Callaway County. A question or comment on Kentucky Tonight.
Yes. I was wondering, are they come up with a way to fix home computers with this glitch?
PCs, Mr. Stone. We will probably get into that. Mr. Brown, why don't you quickly deal with that, please?
First of all, the newer model PCs sold within the past, well, say 98 or 99, will not have the problem. They're compliant. Older ones, you'll probably find a few that do not properly calculate the date, but it's very likely that it won't matter. We're finding an awful lot of applications. I mean, a lot of people use their computers for word processing. Maybe they're writing letters. Well, it doesn't matter. Now, if you ask the computer to put the proper date in your letter, it might be wrong. That's easy to go fix. So it's not a serious problem. A few cases of computers that are perhaps doing financial calculations or portfolio monitoring or something like that might begin to calculate the example we saw earlier, the 97 years of interest instead of 3. Some of those are so obvious, it's clear to everybody something bad's gone wrong. The few that are left might be pretty bad, and somebody would need to carefully monitor their system, maybe double check some of the calculations. Think about whether or not you're trying to do date calculations where one end or the other are in opposite centuries. In other words, one of the dates is beyond 2000 and the other is prior to 2000. Those are the most likely ones to get hit.
Mr. Jefferson?
If, or what someone should do also, besides be aware, awareness is a real important thing here. But if you have a computer made by someone like Compaq, Dell, Gateway, go to their website. If you go to Dell's website, they have a Y2K page set up. You look up your model, it'll tell you if it's compliant or not. If it's not, in many cases, you can download a software fix to make it compliant, or they'll tell you you can't do it, or maybe you have to order a chip and have it replaced. Compaq has been very aggressive. IBM, Dell, Gateway, all of these major manufacturers are very, very aggressive at solving this problem. If you're outside of the majors, then you should probably check with the company that you purchase your computer from. You also really want to be very careful about downloading software off the internet to check your system. Some software, and I'll give an example, Eudora Pro Mail 4.0. If you're running Eudora Pro on boot up, a lot of people have Eudora, so they go out and check their email when they turn their computer on. If you run some of these software programs that change your date over to the year 2000, and you run, or you boot your computer up as part of the process, it reboots, it will load Eudora. Then when it sets the date back, and you reboot again to get the software out, even if you pass, what will happen is Eudora gets confused. It says, wait a minute, the whole mail system is now corrupt, and it wants to reinitialize and wipe everything out. And I've personally seen this. So you have to watch just downloading something and say, well, I'll stick this disk in my computer and fix it.
But the best idea, the best suggestion is go to the company.
Go to the manufacturer.
All right.
Yes.
Let's go back to the phones. Leona Milner from Jefferson County on Kentucky Tonight, please.
I want to ask a question about the water. If the purification system goes down, account of everything being on the computer, and how will they pump water to homes and so forth? I'm concerned about that more than anything else.
Thank you very much for your call and your question tonight. Of course, we've also read about this, an answer from...
I really think that's an excellent question, and I think this is really about all of us, alerting local government. in municipalities, that even though it might not have been a computer, it might be a delivery device that has a chip in it that needs to be checked. So there may be no systems involved per se, but this is one of those issues that I think that we have to make sure that is understood by local government.
Well, I think, too, the question might be, would it be necessary or just a good idea that we keep some bottled water in our home in case those communities did not receive the word or didn't take the action that they should have taken?
Well, you know, many of us already do.
Well, I would assume, yes.
You know, this may be another one of those rent situations where we're going to go and try to buy out all the bottled water in the last week or so. But I think many of us do keep bottled water.
Mr. Hatchett?
Soon after our performance audit of the state-level government's management of the Y2K problem, we began to survey local institutions of government around Kentucky. And while our surveying is ongoing, it is certainly not complete by any means, it has revealed a rather alarming number of local governments across Kentucky who simply underestimate the impact that it's going to have on them, don't understand the impact. We've surveyed fire districts who say we don't have computers and therefore we don't have a problem. But they've said nothing about the electronics on their fire engines or their radios or the rescue devices that have some sort of time-sensitive embedded chip in them or something of that nature. So it can be something that mundane and that seemingly small that will trip up these small units of government around Kentucky. And so we're trying, again, to raise the profile, and tonight's a perfect opportunity for us.
Well, raising the awareness of the problem and getting something done or making an impact on these communities is one thing. You know, we don't want to cry wolf in this situation. I think you've all said that. Mr. Jefferson, you said you were even taking a more conservative stand in this area. But what can be done and what should be done in a very short period of time?
Well, the key to a Y2K project is to take the proper steps. You have to establish a Y2K team. The Y2K team cannot be headed by the office receptionist. The Y2K team must be chaired by an executive with the authority to make decisions and the authority to allocate funds. The second thing you have to do is make sure that you are following a methodology, a standard way of reporting. We need to have, this is where we're going, step 1, 2, 3, through 5,000. These are the exact steps we're going to do, and we are going to document that we took these steps because of legal ramifications. And then the third and most critical component that keeps coming up just as a word here is audit. The word audit is the key to this whole thing. You have to assess what you have. And most companies will somebody may walk through an office and say, well, I have 5 PCs, I've done my audit. That is not an audit. An audit goes into great detail. I have this type of alarm system on manufacture on this date by this serial number, and we are concerned about this because it may have a certain type of chip. We need to go validate that information and run tests. A good audit is the key, and from your audit, then you can identify your risk. You take that and summarize it into a risk assessment.
All right.
And that tells you where your danger is, and then from there you can do, as was mentioned earlier, triage. Plan what you can fix, what you can't right now, budget the money, and get on with it.
Okay. Back to the phones. Juanita Ely from Louisville. A question or comment on Kentucky Tonight, please.
I have a question. I appreciate your program. And my question is, how would the problem affect direct deposited government checks?
All right, Ms. Ely, thanks very much for your question, and an answer will become forthcoming. Mr. Hatchett?
Well, let me say that it's my understanding that the federal government that had originally mandated that all payments would become electronic and would be direct deposit after a certain date has backed off of that mandate now. And I gather that the Y2K problem may be a factor in their decision-making on that subject.
Well, first of all, 76% of all Social Security checks are electronically deposited.
76%?
76%, and that is a number that I just heard within the last 2 weeks. Actually, I found that quite astonishing. But, you know, part of it is really that whole chain. You know, we talked a little bit that you just can't remediate one part. You have to remediate everything. One of the things that's going to go on over the next several months, I think, is we're going to be doing a lot of testing In other words, a lot of data is exchanged between state government and federal government. That testing is about to begin over the next couple of quarters.
A final congressional report that we talked about before we went on the air tonight was released today on the Y2K and how the federal government is handling this, and they've come up several times tonight as maybe the possibility that they could step in and help local communities or even the citizens of the United States. Yet the congressman who released this report, for example, gave the executive branch of the federal government a D on his report card basis. He gave some of the other, I think he called the year 2000 progress gloomy. Some agencies of the federal government, he said, are just not ready to tackle this problem and won't have the time in the time that we have in 1999 to address it. So a minute ago when we were talking to the gentleman from far western Kentucky, and you mentioned FEMA, you know, we usually think of FEMA coming in during a disaster.
That's correct.
Are we going to get to a situation before that time, though, where we won't have to call FEMA in for a disaster in some of these communities, Mr. Brown? Or will the state indeed have to pick up maybe some of the areas where the federal government is not as far along as we are in the state?
I think you're finding that FEMA is now trying to get a little proactive and anticipate placement of resources around the country to handle their typical workload. And they're also beginning to think about additional problems similar to year 2000 and other types of crises. It's my understanding, though, that Social Security has a pretty good grade on being year 2000 ready. And so that one particular area probably leads the federal government in being prepared.
Of course, her question was about, I don't think she pinpointed Social Security, she just said other federal deposited checks. So still there's some work to be...
And again, there's two issues. You know, we talk about Social Security, and they've actually gotten a fairly good grade. Now, I don't know about this particular congressman, but others will say that the U.S. Treasury Department hasn't done a very good job.
I'll show you that report if it just came out today.
I've not seen it.
Okay. Back to the phones. Marty Terry, Mr. Marty Terry from Lawrenceburg. A question or comment, please.
How you doing, sir?
Fine. How are you tonight?
I'm just, well, I'm worried to death, but I'm fine. Actually, I work at a company that has about 700 employees, and I've noticed that the computers, as I walk by them, have a slash date, 2-digit /98. So I started asking different people, and they're like, don't worry about it, they'll fix it. So I talked to mid-level management, and I've talked to top as far as like number 3 at a company of 700 people, and they literally cannot even spell Y2K. They're talking about the 2KY problem, and what's blowing my mind is it's just on and on and on and on. They keep saying that they'll fix it, they'll fix it, they'll fix it, and nobody has any idea. Nobody's checked for any embedded chips, and what's really mind-boggling about it is nobody has any idea. And one of your gentlemen there was talking about bank runs. If they really want a rapid panic type of reaction, what they need to do is keep everybody as ignorant as they're keeping them. And then when they show up for work next year and things don't work right, what are people going to do? That's my question. I don't understand where the press is on this issue. The press usually likes to take an issue and create it the way they want it to do and start an issue, and this is their chance.
Mr. Terry, thanks very much for joining us tonight on Kentucky Tonight. Some thoughtful comments and a question.
First of all, I applaud the gentleman for asking the questions, and frankly, I would suggest that you continue to do that, because that is doing due diligence. I think we've been at both extremes of this question, though. We talked in terms that we had a lot of publicity. A lot of people said, oh, it's all about those old computers and it's all about those old systems and it's nothing else. And I think that we're discovering it's a lot more. And I think now we're actually getting into what I would call due diligence. We're actually considering, how do we run this as a project? And there is no way to do that except very laboriously.
He's brought up another point, too, that a lot of people, especially with PCs, think, well, PC, if it's a PC, we put a disk in, we check it, and it's okay. What people don't understand is that Y2K exists on multiple levels. The chips on the PC itself are one level. The software is another level. The operating system is another level. You have level after level inside of this problem. And another thing is people keep saying, well, we'll deal with it. We're going to handle it. We're going to handle it. Well, there's a limit to resources to solve this problem. And as 1999 is getting here, more and more resources are being sapped up by especially large companies. So the small to mid-sized companies are going to find themselves having a real difficult problem getting expertise to resolve these issues.
Mr. Jefferson, a lot of people might be wondering how we got into the problem in the first place, and are we going to rely on the same people who got us into this problem to get us out?
Well, I think as somebody who started my career in programming, when we were doing things a long time ago, there were a couple of problems. Number one was space. Saving dates or trimming off the 2 digits was a way to save space. You have computers, the first PCs that came out, the first time we had a 5 megabyte drive was an incredible feature. You know, now we talk about having 5 gigabytes and generally bigger even in home PCs. So when we were programming, we had to do anything we could do to save space, whatever it took. And 1 out of 6, it depends on who you read, either 1 in 6 or 1 in 8 lines of code averages a reference to a date. So inside of a program with 1 million lines, if you save 2 digits in every 6 lines, suddenly the numbers add up to a lot of savings. So those were done, and the programming industry itself figured, okay, we'll go down this path for a while, then there's going to be this great revolution, we'll dump all this and go somewhere else. And that has never really happened. We've seen technology leapfrogging, but what we've also seen is, okay, software companies compete with each other to get products. So am I going to take an existing product, port it over, bring it over to a new platform, a new language, and fix it up and make it look sexy and sell it, or am I going to start over? What are you going to do? You're going to take 6 months instead of 3 years.
Yeah, Mr. Brown, do you sort of come to the whole dilemma the same way as Mr. Jefferson?
Well, yes, but let me add a little thing, because I'm old enough that I started in the programming back in the 60s. It was just the way things were done. It's not so much there was a conscious decision saying we've got to save. Everybody deals with two-digit dates. Most people's checkbooks still have 19 and a dash out there. And all of life is just dealt with two-digit years. And so the computer industry did it too. And yes, we were tight for storage space, and yes, disk space was extremely expensive, and everybody was doing everything they could to save space and money. But it wasn't that conscious that everybody sat down and said, okay, let's throw out all those 19s.
I think there's one other issue. I think that all software programs especially lived a lot longer than anybody ever intended them to.
Oh, it's amazing.
You know, when we wrote programs, we said, gee, we're going to have an opportunity here to rewrite these. But once that investment is made, it's very, very difficult to change. All right,
back to the phones, and Dan Pukar from Fort Thomas. Mr. Pukar, a question or comment, please.
Yes, I was calling about, I heard, I think her name is Miss Valente. I think that's her name.
Valicente.
Valicente, there we go. We were talking about contingency plans, and I'm just kind of curious with the electric and the wastewater treatment plants for drinking water and so forth. These contingency plans, are there anything like backup generators or a system of sorts to go back the way we did things in the 70s? And if not, is there a possibility, do you think, in your mind, that FEMA or the federal government will declare martial law?
Well, I don't think we have any reason to do that right now. I think that would be premature for us to talk about that. Contingency plans are really put in place as a backup if we don't do an adequate job of addressing the mission-critical systems. You know, we've talked a lot about mission-critical systems, but let me define what that is. Mission-critical systems are systems that affect the health, welfare, safety, and financial viability. And not every single system running is really affecting that. So first of all, you know, we have to zero in on those systems. And contingency planning is really done as a backup. First of all, there might be manual methods in some ways to help do some of the systems. Let's say a system fails and it's taken and checks. Well, there may be a manual backup for that for a short period of time. You might not want to do it a long time. But the contingency planning, I think we're just beginning that. So I'm not sure that I can adequately answer the question that you ask. In other words, we're saying, what if we had several outages across the state? What would we do, and how would we mobilize?
All right. Let's take a quick question or comment as we conclude tonight from Judy Hughes from Clay County. Ms. Hughes, a question or comment, please.
Yeah, I have a question. What about people like on Social Security disability, and their checks goes to the banks and stuff like that, and electricity? If the computer's shut down, what do we do?
All right, Ms. Hughes, thanks very much for a quick question. Again, we've touched on that, but again, just a word of advice from Mr. Jefferson.
Well, I think it's, first off, you just want to be aware that your bank is compliant. I would not be too concerned about the feds, although they've people like Department of Energy, they receive an F. It's very scary. But from the Social Security standpoint, they've done very well. But I think you want to double check that your bank is also taking steps to make sure that they are solvent, and that's really the key.
Go to your bank and ask them.
Go to your bank and ask them.
Mr. Hatchett, as we conclude with just seconds remaining, what would you advise maybe some of the smaller towns and cities and communities in Kentucky to do, talking to the community leaders or just average citizens? How can they get proactive in this area?
They simply have to ask hard questions of the people they have elected to operate the citizens' businesses, the public's businesses. They have to ask questions like, how many personnel do we have devoted to the Y2K issue, and how many dollars of resources have we allocated to it? Do we have a budget for that in this community or in this particular program? I've always believed that if you want to see what sort of priority a program has, you take a look at where the money is going. And if they've budgeted for it, then it sounds as if there's some rational approach to the problem. I think they've simply got to keep this on the front burner, and they have to continue to rattle the cage of the people who are running the business of government, if you will.
And Mrs. Valicente, you have a brochure that they can get, and we don't have a lot of time to go into the details of that, but very quickly, just what it is and where they can get it.
This brochure was put out by Governor Patton's office, and it really reinforces what Mr. Hatchett just said. It asks questions, very simple questions. I would suggest that they call the governor's office, 502-564-2611, and just ask for the year 2000 brochure.
It's free. They'll mail it out, and it's going to be a good guide for the citizens of the state as we go into this.
It's especially good for local government and small businesses.
Mr. Brown, a quick tip from you before we leave?
Well, I'm most interested in the caller who reported that he sees a computer where he works that's apparently not compliant. I think advice to him and people like him would be to keep raising the awareness level of their superiors and supervisors, and maybe even in the maintenance and engineering departments of these companies, because there's a huge amount of manufacturing equipment that has been built with embedded computer systems. It's a varying age from fairly recent to very old. Kentucky's a state where many of the manufacturing businesses are really branches of large corporations based elsewhere. So the Kentucky half of the corporation is not getting the same attention as the corporate headquarters. So people like the caller that recognize the problem have just got to make noise within their own organization and drive the project to get these things out of there.
Mr. Brown, are you going to get on an airplane if you had to fly somewhere on the January 1?
Well, I never have flown anywhere on January 1, and
all right. Okay. Thanks very much to the panel for joining us tonight for a very interesting conversation, and thanks to all of you from across the state of Kentucky for joining us on Kentucky Tonight. For Kentucky Tonight, I'm Bill Goodman. Good evening.
If you have something to say about tonight's topic, or if you want to tell us what you think about Kentucky Tonight, call and leave a recorded message at 1-800-494-7605. Fax us at 1-800-494-7606. Send email to kytonight@ket.org. Or send letters to 600 Cooper Drive, Lexington, Kentucky, 40502. And visit our website at www.ket.org. Last week, we talked about state tax reform. Here's some of what we heard from viewers after that program.
This is Charles Honeycutt, Mayor of the City of Glasgow, Kentucky, a city of 14,000 people. And the legislative issue of amending the Constitution so that personal property and automobiles cannot be taxed. If this is applied to our community so that we're not allowed to do this, our particular city budget would lose $300,000 a year. Our schools would lose valuable funds that they need for maintenance of their buildings and their programs.
I would like to know, why does the state need to generate tax revenue in the first place?
One of the things I think is totally unfair is this return retirement tax, even though I benefit from it. Just letting $35,000 per person not be taxed, Social Security not be taxed, means that you got two people getting $35,000 in pension, $15,000 each in Social Security. That's $100,000 a year that they're letting go tax-free. Then you got people out here trying to raise a family of 4 or 5 children, making $25,000 to $40,000, and they're paying lots of taxes. Then you got some couple making $100,000 and paying nothing. That's totally not fair, in my opinion.
Thanks to everyone who called or sent comments about last week's program. Next week, we'll discuss teacher training. How should Kentucky go about improving the quality of teaching in public schools? We hope you'll join us for that discussion next week. Thanks for watching Kentucky Tonight on KET, the Kentucky Network.